Read the Bible every day so you'll be full of faith. Welcome you to join Bible Race to read the entire Bible in 2 years. I believe God will bless you, He will lift you up, and your life will never be the same.
Book of Deuteronomy, chapter 33 to 34, verse 1. This is the blessing with which Moses, the man of God, blessed the people of Israel before his death. He said, "The Lord came from Sinai and dawned from Seir upon us. He shone forth from Mount Paran. He came from the 10,000s of holy ones, with flaming fire at his right hand. Yes, he loved his people. All his holy ones were in his hand. So they followed in your steps, receiving direction from you. When Moses commanded us a law as a possession for the assembly of Jacob. Thus the Lord became king in Jeshurun when the heads of the people were gathered, all the tribes of Israel together. Let Reuben live and not die, but let his men be few. And this he said of Judah, Hear, O Lord, the voice of Judah, and bring him into his people, with your hands contend for him, and be a help against his adversaries. And of Levi he said, Give to Levi your Thummim and your Urim to your godly one, whom you tested at Massah, with whom you quarreled at the waters of Meribah, who said of his father and mother, I regard them not. He disowned his brothers and ignored his children, for they observed your word and kept your covenant. They shall teach Jacob your rules and Israel your law. They shall put incense before you and hold burnt offerings on your altar. Bless, O Lord, your substance, and accept the work of his hands. Crush the loins of his adversaries, of those who hate him, that they rise not again. Of Benjamin he said, The beloved of the Lord dwells in safety. The high God surrounds him all day long and dwells between his shoulders. And of Joseph he said, Blessed by the Lord be his land, with the choicest gifts of heaven above, and of the deep that crunches beneath, with the choicest fruits of the sun, and the rich yield of the mountains, with the finest produce of the ancient mountains, and the abundance of the everlasting hills, with the best gifts of the earth and its fullness, and the favor of him who dwells in the bush. May these rest on the head of Joseph, on the pate of him who is prince among his brothers. A firstborn bull, he has majesty, and his horns are the horns of a wild ox. With them he should gore the peoples, all of them, to the ends of the earth. They are the 10,000s of Ephraim, and they are the thousands of Manasseh. And of Jubilant he said, Rejoice, jubilant in your going out, and Issachar in your tents. They shall call peoples to their mountain. There they offer right sacrifices, for they draw from the abundance of the seas and the hidden treasures of the sand. And of Gad he said, Blessed be he who enlarges Gad. Gad crouches like a lion, he tears off arm and scalp. He chose the best of the land for himself. For there a commander's portion was reserved, and he came with the heads of the people. With Israel he executed the justice of the Lord, and his judgments for Israel. And of Dan he said, Dan is a lion's cub that leaps from Bashan. And of Naphtali he said, O Naphtali, sated with favor and full of blessing of the Lord, possesses the lake and the south. And of Asher he said, Most blessed of sons be Asher. Let him be the favorite of his brothers, and let him dip his foot in oil. Your bars shall be iron and bronze, and as your days, so shall your strength be. There is none like God, O Jeshurun, who rides through the heavens to your help, through the skies in his majesty. The eternal God is your dwelling place, and underneath are the everlasting arms. And he thrust out the enemy before you, and said, Destroyed. So Israel lived in safety. Jacob lived alone in a land of grain and wine, whose heavens drop down dew. Happy are you, O Israel, who is like you? A people saved by the Lord, the shield of your help, and the sword of your triumph. Your enemies shall come fawning to you, and you shall tread upon their backs. Chapter 34. Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho, and the Lord showed him all the land. Gilead as far as Dan, all Naphtali, the land of Ephraim and Manasseh, all the land of Judah as far as the western sea, the Negeb and the plain, that is, the valley of Jericho, the city of palm trees as far as Zoar. And the Lord said to him, This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him in the valley in the land of Moab, opposite Beth-peor, but no one knows the place of his burial to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was undimmed, and his vigor unabated. And the people of Israel wept for Moses in the plain of Moab 30 days. Then the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. And Joshua, the son of Nun, was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. So the people of Israel obeyed him and did as the Lord had commanded Moses. And there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, none like him for all the signs and the wonders that the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land, and for all the mighty power and all the great deeds of terror that Moses did in the sight of all Israel.
The following is the English translation of Pastor Moen Wu's teaching on the book of Deuteronomy, chapters 33 to 34, translated by Bryson. Read the Bible every day so you'll be full of faith. Deuteronomy chapters 33 and 34 mark the final sermon of Moses in the book of Deuteronomy. It is his 7th sermon, and in this final sermon, it serves as a blessing to the 12 tribes of Israel as a whole. Within this blessing, the heart of God is revealed. Of course, chapter 34 shows Moses ascending Mount Nebo, viewing the entire land, and the Lord personally burying him. Through this final 7th sermon, we take a look at, even though God has been delivering a series of rebukes, even mentioning many curses beforehand, in chapter 33 you can see that it's all about blessings. Ultimately, God's intention is for his people to live within his blessings. So before discussing the blessings, we will take a look at verse 22 to 5. He said, The Lord came from Sinai and dawned from Seir upon us. He shone forth from Mount Paran. He came from the 10,000s of holy ones, with flaming fire at his right hand. Why does he talk about these things before the blessings? Verse 2 and 3 speak of God's flaming fire, his glory, Mount Sinai, and the covenant with them. Verse 3 speaks of God's love towards his people, reminding us of one thing: blessings come from God and curses come from him as well. Blessings come from God and curses are a consequence of God withdrawing his blessings. Therefore, we must understand this God. We not only proclaim him as a loving God, but also recognize him as a God of flaming fire. For Christians today, it's crucial to remind ourselves that we shouldn't only focus on God's loving blessings, declarations, and words. We should also spend time understanding the reasons behind the curses that come. Because resisting God and departing from his covenant, we can't ignore and skip past reading these curses. So when talking about blessings, it still comes from the law of Sinai. We must acknowledge that he is a God of flaming fire. In verse 5, Thus the Lord became king in Jeshurun, when the heads of the people were gathered, all the tribes of Israel together. Do you see the sentence, Thus the Lord became king in Jeshurun? Yesterday we particularly mentioned Jeshurun, which essentially refers to upright people. Next, blessings for the 12 tribes are given. Therefore, here, speaking of Jeshurun, means that Lord will reign among this group of upright people. Let's take a look at verse 26. In verse 26 it says, "There is none like God, O Jeshurun, who rides through the heavens to your help, through disguising his majesty." What does this mean? The entire blessing is encapsulated in God's blessing upon Jeshurun, which refers to the people of Israel. So even though God's gaze sees them continually living in ultimately rebelling against him, God's ultimate gaze is still looking at them as Jeshurun. This is also how God looks at us. So we can pray, "God, let your gaze upon us be focused on our inner selves. In your eyes, we are Jeshurun." Now let's take a look at this map. This map clearly illustrates the 12 tribes and their allocation of land during the process of casting lots. The land they drew during this process of casting lots is already clearly showing in the blessings of the 12 tribes by Moses. In Deuteronomy, we see the entire process of casting lots was orchestrated by God. Within the blessings of the 12 tribes, you won't find a blessing for the tribe of Simeon. You'll notice that the land of Simeon is within the territory of Judah. Do you see that Simeon's territory is within Judah's land? Why is this? Because Simeon had to be covered by Judah. In Numbers chapter 25, an incident occurred where their leader engaged in sexual immorality, resulting in a plague among the people, which claimed the lives of 24,000 people, mostly from the tribe of Simeon. Therefore, during the census in chapter 26, the tribe of Simeon became the smallest tribe with many casualties. Therefore, their future inheritance is within the tribe of Judah, without their own blessing, because they turned away from God, engaged with idols, and sinned against God. So you see their portion of land is very small. It had to be covered by the tribe of Judah. Now let's look at the first blessing, which is for Reuben. In verse 6 it says, "Let Reuben live and not die, but let his men be few." God still loves Reuben, even though they engaged in sexual immorality, losing the inheritance of the firstborn. But the first blessing still came upon him. Not dying means their numbers won't dwindle, especially because they're more vulnerable to attacks being on the east side of the river. Now look at verse 7, which is the blessing for Judah. "Hear, O Lord, the voice of Judah, and bring him to his people. With your hands contend for him, and be a help against his adversaries." Do you see? The tribe of Judah is at the forefront. The tribe of praise is walking at the front. So during the battle, God assists them in achieving victory. Jesus also comes from the tribe of Judah. Therefore, Jesus defeated Satan on the cross. So Judah is a tribe of praise and a warfare victorious tribe. From verse 8 to verse 11, this blessing talks about Levi. However, you won't find the tribe of Levi on the allocation map because their inheritance is God himself. But within the entire blessing, the tribe of Levi receives the most blessings because they are the servants of God, chosen by God. In verse 8, it mentions, "Whom you tested at Massa, with whom you quarreled at the waters of Meribah." You'll find that this part isn't recorded, but the Levites did pass the test. In verse 9, during the incident of worshipping the golden calf of Sinai, the Levites also passed the test. These people had earned God's trust. They are able to teach the people, bless them, and God will personally protect them from the enemy's attacks. Verse 12 speaks about Benjamin. Look at Benjamin. His blessing is, "The beloved of the Lord dwells in safety. The high God surrounds him all day long and dwells between his shoulders." So although Benjamin's portion of land is small within the tribe of Judah, but did you know it's prophesied here that the temple will be built in the territory of Benjamin? Therefore, God dwells with them, and the temple is constructed in the area of Benjamin. Verses 13 to 17 talk about Joseph. Joseph actually refers to the tribes of Manasseh and Ephraim. Here it speaks about the best things of the earth, double blessings, which are given to Manasseh and Ephraim. So the land east and west of the Jordan, plains, grasslands, and riverbanks are all given to them. In verses 18 and 19, it talks about Zebulun and Issachar. You see Zebulun and Issachar slightly above Manasseh. What does it mean? Verse 19, "They shall call people to their mountain. There they offer right sacrifices, for they draw from the abundance of the seas and the hidden treasures of the sand." In fact, this also foreshadows the time when Jesus preached the gospel there. Jesus began preaching the gospel in the area. This area was also bustling with trade because it was on the highway, the road of God. The highway of holiness mentioned in Isaiah is also here. The road of God passed through the territories of Zebulun and Issachar, so they will be involved in business and gain much abundance. Verses 20 and 21 talk about Gad. Look where Gad is. Gad is on the land east of the Jordan, right below Manasseh's territory. So in verse 21, he chose the best of the land for himself. This means they chose their own portion, with Gad choosing the land east of the river first. But God still gave them grace, and for their commander's portion was reserved, which are the cities of refuge. And he came with the heads of the people. With Israel he executed the justice of the Lord and his judgments for Israel. This shows that they were willing to rise up and fight alongside their brothers in the land west of the Jordan. Verse 12 talks about Dan. Dan is a lion's cub that leaps from Bashan. But when you actually look, Dan's territory should be beside Ephraim. But where is Bashan? Bashan is above Naphtali in Aram. This suggests that Dan should have been a lion, a judge, and so on. But Dan deviated from the land allocated to them by God. Later, during the time of Joshua, they refused to go to this land. They went and found a place of land for their own above Naphtali. They leapt out from Bashan. In this way, Moses' prophecy and blessing have already been mentioned to them here. They were indeed lions, powerful, but they couldn't become great lions because they chose their own path. Genesis 49 also talks about Dan becoming a snake by the roadside, a viper along the path. So it's very likely that the future Antichrist will come from the tribe of Dan. This is a prophecy that people have speculated about, but it's not necessarily accurate. As for Naphtali, in verses 23 to 24, concerning Naphtali, it says, O Naphtali, sated with favor and full of the blessing of the Lord. So they should be grateful. The Lord Jesus was born in Nazareth, in Galilee by the sea, in the territory of Naphtali, so they were blessed. Therefore, Jesus was born in that area, and that last part possesses the lake in the south. Now, let's look at Asher. Asher is not that bad. Most blessed of sons be Asher. Let him be the favorite of his brothers, and let him dip his foot in oil. Your bars shall be iron and bronze, and as your days so shall your strength be. This indicates that in the territory of Asher they will have strength to resist the forces coming from the north and Lebanon, as many battles come from the north. They will stand in this position to fight. Your bars shall be iron and bronze, and as your days so shall your strength be. It's mentioned that they will dip their foot in oil. Actually, from 1999 to 2013, in the area of Asher, near the seas, Israel found a place with oil and gas. This was the only place where oil is produced in Israel is in this area. So it's truly God fulfilling Moses' prophecy. The foot dipping in oil refers to natural gas and oil that's all within the territory of Asher. So the abundance of oil fields in Israel is also due to the abundance of Asher's land. Of course, Asher also faces particularly many battles. Aggression from Lebanon is especially directed at Asher. After reviewing this map, let's go back to verses 26 to 29. Here it speaks of God's provision, protection, help, and battles all upon Israel. So although the 12 tribes received blessings, God's true blessing is upon the entire Israel, the entire Jeshurun, from the God of fire. His love will reach the land of Israel. Moving on to chapter 34, in verses 1 to 4, Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo. This is in chapter 32, where God invites Moses up to Mount Nebo. Let's look at this map again. When Moses went up to this area, first look at how the Lord showed them all the land, Gilead as far as Dan. You can see Moses standing on Mount Nebo, and to his right is the whole land of Gilead, and Dan is at the top. Do you see it? Dan's at the top. Now look at the whole land of Naphtali, probably about like at 11 o'clock position. Do you see the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh? It's on the right side in front of Moses. The land of Judah as far as the western sea. That's where Moses was looking, more towards the left. In verse 4, the Lord said to him, and the Lord said to him, this is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to your offspring. I will let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there. Through this map, you can understand that the inheritance God gave to Israel was very large. Moses stood on Mount Nebo and saw from his right to his entire left. The land was so vast that it's almost impossible to see it all with the naked eye. Finally, why add the phrase, but you shall not go over there? You might feel that God is cruel. Moses worked his whole life but couldn't enter. Actually, we had discussed this in chapter 32, Whether Moses entered or not, he would not have enjoyed the inheritance of the promised land of Canaan, because God was his inheritance. The inheritance of the Levites was God, so Moses' inheritance was God, and God's portion was Moses. Therefore, Moses already possessed all heavenly blessings. In chapter 34, Moses was buried by God. He didn't die of old age or weakness. He could still walk up Mount Nebo, just like Aaron. They both ascended in their strength. It was God who buried them, so they didn't die of old age. They were in their prime and strength when received by God. This also represents every Christian. Today, as we sincerely serve God and walk in His path, our souls are also accepted by God. We can truly proclaim that in God's presence, we are strong and not weak. Similarly, the law cannot enter the land of Canaan. The law and grace cannot fit together. The law guides us into grace. The law is transmitted through Moses, and grace comes through Jesus Christ. So why couldn't Moses enter? There's a profound meaning. Our entry into the land of Canaan is accomplished through grace. The function of the law is to lead us to the door of grace. We enter through Jesus Christ and through the washing of His blood. So there's no need to complain about Moses. How could God be so cruel to Moses? No. God also teaches us through Moses' example that every leader must know how to rest. In rest, we listen to God, honor God, and in this matter, Moses received a reprimand, a seemingly restriction, which is actually a clear teaching for every one of us. It's a very clear teaching for us brothers and sisters and every leader. Let's look at verses 5 to 8. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab. And in verse 7, Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eye was undimmed and his vigor unabated. And the people of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Then the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. Now look at verses 9 to 12. Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom because Moses had laid his hands on him. So Joshua was chosen by God. Verses 10 to 12 are the best and most glorious conclusion to Moses' life work. And there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, that is, until Jesus came, whom the Lord knew face to face. This is because Moses encountered visions, he heard God's voice, and he saw the greatness of God. But what Moses always sought was to see God with his own eyes. So God allowed Moses to see His glory with His own eyes, covering him with His hand, and speaking to him face to face. This is also our urgent prayer today. Lord, help me on the path of my life. I long to meet You face to face. I long to be raised up by You, but I'm not looking for positions like officials, kings, priests, or prophets in my life so that I can be fulfilled. I'm not seeking to fulfill people's needs, but it's my calling in my life. My calling in my life is to love You face to face. So, dear family, sometimes we often think, wow, his calling is great, his destiny is amazing. He does great works for the Lord. Yes, it's the calling of the Lord and it's glorious. But the decree God made about Moses is that he is the one who knew me face to face. Dear family, in the life of a Christian, there is a highest calling, a most glorious destiny, which is to know God face to face, to become one who sits at His feet and listens to His words as the bride of Christ, to be a true son, getting the inheritance. This is God's most glorious calling for us. In verse 11, none like Him, for all the signs and the wonders that the Lord sent Him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land, and for all the mighty power and all the great deeds of terror that Moses did in the sight of all Israel. Therefore, the whole book of Deuteronomy teaches us three important points. First, why is the law reiterated repeatedly? Because people tend to forget. Through the reiteration of the law, people are reminded to fear God, seek God, and honor God's word. Secondly, the book of Deuteronomy records many events, large and small, describing God's meticulous care. We must see that in our lives, whether we can always think that God is constantly speaking, He is constantly teaching us. The book of Deuteronomy applies to the life of a Christian today. Can I often hear God speaking in my life? You must pray, God, I don't want to forget Your grace, Your salvation. I want to treasure Your words. I want to be someone who listens and obeys. Second, I want to be someone who hears Your words. God's instructions in Deuteronomy were very detailed to the point that God speaks about the large and small things in our daily lives. Let's pray. God, may the book of Deuteronomy be used in my daily life. Speak to me about the large and small things in my life, whether I'm, for example, getting a taxi, traveling, driving, meeting, working, eating, sleeping, relaxing, wearing clothes, interpersonal relationships with others, and so on. Please speak to me in all of these things. Pray about this because our relationship with God is very detailed. Third, the whole book of Deuteronomy feels like following the law. Be careful to do what God does. We will be blessed if we do what God has commanded us, but if we do what God has forbidden, we will incur curses. However, the core of the entire book of Deuteronomy is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. You can fulfill all the laws, but if you don't love God, it's in vain. The key is that we love God wholeheartedly, so we live out the requirements of the law. God gives us a new life, a reborn life, a heavenly life. We are no longer restricted by the law. We live at the heart of God. Dear family, this is Deuteronomy. So let us remind ourselves constantly not to forget, always be thankful, always remember to follow God's law, have the fear of God, and always pray and ask God to speak to us meticulously. I want to live in the presence of God at all times. Lastly, do your best with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength to love the Lord your God. This is the core point of Moses' fifth book, the book of Deuteronomy. Amen.
Dear families, we hope that you enjoy the Bible race as much as we do. If you are willing to volunteer to translate the original Chinese teaching into English or assist with video editing, please email service@360sunrise.com. Thank you.